Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, I had to call an ambulance because my wife was having a heart attack. The crazy homeowner association president stopped the ambulance at the gate to the HOA and banned them from entering the HOA because ambulances are too noisy and supposedly violate HOA guidelines. I ended up suing the president. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. I don't know exactly how HOAs work in other parts of the world. I assume though they are similar to the ones we have in South Africa in the sense that they cannot do things like stop emergency services from coming into a community. My HOA though was run by a guy that is pretty much an idiot. He thought that was a valid thing to do and an ambulance was not allowed to come into the area. A little backing up first though to give a bit of a picture of the area I live in, as it is a closed community that you cannot get in unless somebody raises a blockade bar and basically allows you in. Most of the time the HOA president is the one manning the area, but other times it will be somebody else on the board. I assume they never hired actual security because then they would not get as much control of who gets in or out. I could not be bothered with any of the political side on the nonsense though, because that day I was having an emergency. I got a very small amount of medical training, but I am able to spot some emergencies when I see them. My wife was having some fairly classic symptoms of a heart attack, and since she had one in the past already, I wanted to hurry and call an ambulance to come right away. We were waiting for what felt like too long, and I left my wife to go outside and see if they went to the wrong house or something. I could notice though that an ambulance was stuck at the gate and the HOA president was not letting them through. I sprinted over all the while yelling to let them in, and my wife was having a heart attack. The HOA president had the nerve to say that they are not allowed to come into the community per the rules. I thought he must have been joking, and the EMTs couldn't believe it either. They told him to open the barrier and let them in so they could help my wife. He claimed that in the bylaws, vehicles with flashing lights and sirens were not allowed as they disturbed the peace. Even though they are not supposed to turn them off, they turned off their lights and sirens just to try and get past this idiot on a power trip. He then said that only small cars were allowed in the HOA and he was not going to let them in. I know this sounds like a long fight, but this all happened very quickly. The EMTs decided to just grab the stretcher and follow me as I ran back to my house. At that point my wife was not doing very good and they rushed her back to the ambulance and to the hospital. I had to follow in my car, but first I let all my anger out on the HOA president. I know, two wrongs don't make a right, but the fact that he wasn't letting my wife get the help she needed, I really didn't care how awful I sounded with the things I said to him. I had to wait at the hospital and it turned out I was right about her having a heart attack. My wife was going to live, but it turned out her heart stopped in the ambulance. They were able to restart it, but it would have been better if she was already in the hospital when it happened. And yeah, she probably would have been fine if it wasn't for the HOA president. I was more concerned about my wife than anything else though, and once I could go back and see her, I kind of forgot about him for a while. It was not until the next day, when all the adrenaline wore off, that I started to think about what happened logically. My wife could have died and it would have been his fault for not letting the ambulance in. I figured there was no way he was allowed to stop them from coming just because it was too noisy, supposedly, and too big of a vehicle. It was not like a resident had bought a giant truck and was going to be keeping it there. And I suppose, Ripe stars, just by coincidence, police vehicles are also too noisy or too big to be allowed in the HOA neighborhood. What a convenient rule. Well, anyway, because of not getting to the hospital right away, my wife was going to need to stay and undergo some rehabilitation. I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about what happened and how even though I let a lot of things slide, I was not gonna let this one go. So then I contacted a lawyer and found out if I had any grounds to sue. The lawyer was appalled by the story I told him and said that the HOA could be at fault for my wife's extended treatment that was needed. I honestly was not even thinking of that side of everything. That was also when I got it confirmed that it was not legal, obviously, to stop any kind of emergency vehicle from getting where it needed to go. My life for the next month became suing the HOA and visiting my wife. I barely had time to remember to eat or sleep between everything. I guess the HOA realized that going to actual court would be a horrible idea, and instead they should try and settle outside with just the lawyers. The police got told by the EMTs what he did though, so he was facing separate charges for refusing them entry. Now, I was suing him more for the personal issues that came with what he did, but I was also suing the HOA for creating harmful bylaws and abusing their power. The only way I was not gonna take him to court is if he paid every single penny of medical expenses I had gotten for my wife through her treatment. It was not a small amount either, and I knew it would pretty much bankrupt the entire HOA. Considering it was that or possible jail, I won and got the money from the HOA for my wife. The HOA was under serious investigation though, and the police were going through their practices with a fine-tooth comb. I think they found a couple of other small things, but nothing like what happened with me. Without any money to run the HOA, it had to basically dissolve and fall apart. I still felt like the actual guy, aka the president, was getting off too easily and wanted to make sure that he really got what he deserved. It turns out that since he was the physical one refusing the ambulance to enter, I could sue him separately from the HOA. So that is exactly what I did. I chose to do this, and the only thing was I could not get money for the medical bill since I already got that from the HOA itself. For him though, I wanted him to pay for the mental stress that the entire situation caused me and my wife. She was stuck in the hospital for a few months because he decided that he had to stop her from getting care. I was granted that as well, and he was basically screwed at that point. He had no power, he had no money, and the government was pressing charges for what he had done. Instead of sitting and watching things play out, I spent as much time as I could with my wife before I could bring her home. I think the happiest part of the ending is that by the time she was ready to go home, he was nowhere to be seen. I have no idea where he ended up going, but I can only hope that wherever he ended up, he never gets an ounce of power again. This man almost killed my wife, and I think if he ever tried to come back to the neighborhood, I would personally show him out the gate with my boot. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta admit, it seems like that South African HOAs are quite on another level than the American ones. I mean, the American ones are pretty crazy too, but at least we haven't seen one yet where an ambulance was denied entry to the neighborhood. That, in my opinion, is just completely insane and trumps almost everything else. But either way, let's continue with the stories. The next one is titled Restaurant Revenge with Karen. This was when I was 18, I am 34 now, so around 2004 or 2005. Think pre-iPhone, but cell phones like the Nokia 3310 existed, which I had one, because my parents wanted to make sure I always could be contacted. I worked at a bar chain restaurant for 6 months, let's call it C. It was a completely new store. When we opened, we were the only building for 8 blocks except for the sister restaurant next door that was part of the same investment group as C. It was a decent upper middle class white neighborhood, so we would get lots of people in the door. I was originally hired as to-go, but I was trained up in almost everything in the restaurant and I frequently filled shifts. And also, I got the most hours for it. It was the worst job I ever had and still is. After getting shifted around to different homes, to-go, QA, host, sometimes server, I eventually ended up in bus, aka cleaning tables. They promised they would move me off of the bus once we had buses, but as we will find out later, that day never came. The main reason this happened is that we ran out of buzzers. They tried hiring buzzers at a rapid rate, but it didn't work. The average survival rate for a buzzer was 2 weeks including training time. Eventually, our reputation of chewing out buzzers made its rounds. No one would even show up for interviews for the job. At C, a pecking order had been established. At the top you had the managers, and then it was the servers, then the bar servers, restaurant servers, etc. And guess what was at the bottom? That's right, buzzers. Anytime I spoke up about how people needed to pre-buzz their tables, people scoffed and said I should just do my job. I explained how I could clear an entire restaurant by myself if everyone pre-buzzed their tables. 30 seconds per table versus 8 minutes per table, but I fell on deaf ears. So I have to explain about why there is a huge time differential between a pre-buzz table and a total buzz table. If the servers took every plate off the table, even if the table was groggy, I could wipe it into my bucket, clean up a few things, wipe off the seat, reset the center of the table, and move on to the next table. I would be in and out in 30 seconds and on to the next table. However, if I had to total buzz a table, I would have to take all of the plates off, organize everything on the tab, etc. Time varied depending on the number of people at the table, 2 minutes for a 2-top, 4 to 5 minutes for a 4-top, etc. If a table had ordered lots of drinks, multiple fajitas, each fajita meal contained no less than 6 dishes, and or had been particularly unsanitary about their eating practices, meaning unruly kids usually, you could add up to 3 minutes per table. This also compounds that I had to go back to the kitchen and sort of through all of the plates and cups, and well, 2 months into my "we are going to move you off of buzzing once we find buzzers," it's a busy Saturday night. I am talking 1 hour wait at 6:30 p.m. Half the tables are currently dirty and I am working my butt off, but each table takes about 5 minutes because no one is pre-buzzing tables. I am told the priority is the restaurant, so I had to tell the bar waiters that they probably would not be buzzed at all because it would be so busy. They were not having that, and the one shift AM, aka assistant manager, told me I should do my job, but I should still prioritize the restaurant, not the bar. But whatever, I am constantly telling servers to pre-buzz their tables only to be ignored. It was a particularly bad night, so I asked if the dishwashers could help me out when I brought back my taps instead of organizing everything myself. They were nice, so they agreed, and it was a decent system, cut out 2 to 3 minutes per table. It was still pretty hell with lots of people wanting food. It still didn't help that I had to go back to the kitchen every time there was a full buzz table. So enter Karen, queen of the bar server BITCHs. Remember that pecking order I mentioned? And yeah, she was the queen of the server order. She was one of the ones that constantly berated me for my job performance, despite the fact that I did more than almost anyone else in the restaurant. She made my last 2 months a living hell, constantly telling me I did not do a good job, that she had to wait for me too long, etc. I constantly told the AMs and manager about the disrespect I received, and they said I should just man up, and she never got a single write-up. One particularly busy Saturday night, Karen was a server in the bar side, which meant she was not in the priority. I told her that I could not buzz her tables unless she pre-buzzed them, and only if they were not restaurant tables I needed to buzz. She was constantly telling me that I needed to buzz her tables, and I was lazy. Despite the fact that I had lifted over 300 taps that night, she was not the priority. She did not pre-buzz any of her tables, and she was always on the back dock smoking. Once that night, a nice couple saw me working in the table behind them and politely asked if they could talk to their server so they could take their order. She had left them alone for 50 minutes while she was smoking on the back dock and flirting with one of the prep cooks. She then scoffed when I interrupted her flirting. "Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. I'm sorry I interrupted your 6th flirting break today, so you can do the thing you were hired to do." About 6:30 p.m. that night, the restaurant got flooded with people. 1 hour waits, and I had to push my butt to the limit. I was flipping tables despite absolutely zero of the servers pre-buzzing. However, since the restaurant was the priority, I could not get to her tables at all. Finally, we got a dip. I could finally get to her 3 tables, and all of them are not pre-buzzed. So I have to do the full buzzing for her tables despite the fact that they've been vacant for almost 45 minutes. After the first table, she follows me back to the second table and tells me I need to hurry and I am garbage at my job and I am making her lose money. I tell her to leave me alone and don't reprimand me in the front of the house. It was embarrassing, with bar patrons looking over their shoulder, and I could see they honestly felt sorry for me. I was at the lowest point in my life at that point in time. I honestly felt like I was the worst human being in the world. Once she left, I stopped buzzing for a second and sat down at the table for a second. I looked at the dirty half-full tap and I got up. The table was not finished and I left my dirty tap on the seat. I went to the back in to go. It was not active and this was before widespread internet. We got maybe 15 orders per night, so the managers had relegated to-go duties to the QA that serviced the rest of the restaurant. It was easily accessible for them, but it was also vacant at that point in time. Call in to go was a relatively new and novel concept. I put down my headset, turned it off, pulled out a to-go pad and wrote a full note noting how this restaurant is going to go down the toilet unless the managers get balls and reprimand the staff for treating buzzers like crap. I then left without telling anyone. I was called on my cell phone about 5 minutes into my drive home and the AM told me, "OP, you still have a shift." My response was, no, I don't, I quit. Their response was, OP, you still have a shift. Again, my response is, no, I effing don't. I don't need to be disrespected like I have. I quit. She had the gall to repeat herself, OP, you still have a shift. But I then hung up and turned off my phone. It turned out that I had left just in time for the dinner rush. Saturdays we closed at midnight, so for those last 4 hours it was hell in a handbasket. I was told that the AM prevented anyone from going home until 2 AM because the restaurant was basically a trash basket by the end. Wait times at 10 PM were capped because they were well over 2 hours. The hosts told me later on that she had to turn away 40 families that night because everything went to hell. Some people just left while waiting for a table, orders were getting misplaced. This information made it up to corporate and they had to call in a fixer team to figure out what happened. They wanted to call me, but I was not going to talk to them. There was some restructuring in the business, the manager got shifted to another position in the company, the AM that called on staff was let go, and Karen wrote up relegated to the crap shifts and eventually left. I myself did not return for 2 months, but not as an employee, but a customer. I was told all this by one of the remaining AMs, the one that actually treated me like a human being, and he gave me all of my tip shares, which was nice. The next best part of this, the day after I left, C, my best friend, found an ad that a huge game maker was looking for QAs. We applied that day and the following week I got interviewed and hired on the spot, but he did not make it. It was the beginning of my programming career. I advanced through that job, got over to automation programming, and then got hired at other companies. Now I am a senior programmer for a sheriff's office with 14 years of programming experience. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta admit, I am so happy for OP that he finally found a job that he is happy with and that he enjoys. I really feel bad for anyone that has to work in such a toxic work environment as OP did in the story. Nobody should have to work in a place like that, and if you currently do, I really hope that things will turn out better for you in the future. The next one is titled, Got My Manager Fired. Years ago, shortly after I graduated high school, I got a new job to support myself during college. The new gig was in a pet store and I was working in the department that sold the fish, aquariums, reptiles and birds, etc. The store manager was an awesome guy who I will call Kurt. Kurt was an old school guy, he went to work, worked hard and went home. That's all he expected out of you as well. My immediate manager over my department was this large snaggletooth witch of a woman, I will call her Stephanie. We got off to a bad start because she quickly found out that I knew more about reptiles than her. She preferred fish, whereas I had kept snakes for the past 4 to 5 years. Her ego could not handle a fresh employee not needing her guidance. From then on she was terrible to me. She singled me out to clean the goldfish tanks and had the other employees cover sales every day I worked. She would say rude things to me such as, "You're the weak link in my team, you're the reason I'm having problems in this department." Fast forward about a year, my hours had been cut by about 25%. I asked the store manager what the deal was and he told me that our department had lost too much money between lack of sales and broken merchandise, etc. This puzzled me, but I did not think much of it because everybody's hours were cut. Simultaneously, myself and a few co-workers had noticed something strange. Stephanie had recently taken much more interest in the customers. She insisted on helping certain customers and sending us to do busy work while they were there. A customer came in one evening and was talking to us about how nice Stephanie is. Turns out Stephanie was breeding mice and selling them to customers outside of the store, and we found out she was breeding all of her animals, her dogs, turtles and mice, and selling them to customers she met through our store. Not only was this taking business from us away, our store had a couple corporate policies, like we did not feed nor sell mice as live food for snakes, and we donated a lot of time and money to shelters, and we condemned breeding dogs and cats for sale. Stephanie was making money by selling animals to the customers, all the while her department had hours cut for all of its employees. It did not make sense how this was costing us so much money until one evening I thought I had figured it out. Stephanie was an otherwise lazy woman, but when one of her customers came in, she was by their side the whole time. I watched closely as she followed a customer around, helping them pick out a cart full of expensive aquarium decorations and terrarium supplies like lights and bulbs. I followed and wrote down every item she grabbed. I wanted to see where this went. She directed the customer to a register and went to check them out. She is lazy and would never do this for any other customers. I noted the time and went back to work. I later spoke to other cashiers about Stephanie checking customers out, and they said that she only ever rang up certain customers and she acted weird when they did. They suspected she was abusing coupons for them or applying hefty discounts. I got my co-workers to corroborate a story about the under-the-table animal sales and suspicious behavior, and I went to talk to Kurt. I handed him a paper with about 20 pieces and the time written on it, and I said, "I think if you look up a transaction from Register 2 at this time last night, you will find a large discount applied to it. These are the items I would expect you to find on that transaction." He was a bit puzzled and I explained everything to him. I told him I did not want to make any accusations before I wasn't sure, but after seeing her in action I was pretty sure something was going on. He thanked me and assured me he would look into it. A couple weeks later I was at work and I noticed Kurt was standing near the door watching closely. It just so happens that Stephanie was coming in for her shift right about that time. The second she walked through the door, he called her over to his office. Apparently, waiting in his office was a regional manager from corporate. He looked at the list I gave him and looked up transactions from the night before. He found one at the exact time I wrote, but it only had about half of the items I listed. However, every item that was on the receipt was on the list I gave him as well. This prompted him to watch her for a few weeks, and in that time frame, they found her to be taking her customers around shopping. Personally taking them to the register and scanning every other item and putting the expensive stuff into the cart without ringing it up. In that time span, she had given away over $1,500 in merchandise, and also he looked back at the logs we keep for broken merchandise that is written off, and he found an excessive amount of aquarium supplies and decorations that were signed off by her. It was something like 1000% more written off broken merchandise than was found at the same time last quarter. All in all, she was charged with stealing and defrauding the store in over $3,500 worth of merchandise, and it just so happened that Kurt had already arranged for police to meet them after firing her to escort her out. I don't know if she went to jail, but I did watch her get walked out by police with about 20 employees staring. I wish I could have said something, but I had to settle for her making eye contact with me as she walked out, to which I gave her a quick wink.